Dear students, well, this is going to be my final video as your online instructor for Christian Thought, your introduction to theology. And you've been done for about 2 weeks, so I just got done with all the grading. So grades are final, grades are posted, everybody did well. There wasn't a grade below a B in terms of the final grades. So you guys are great. That was a really easy class to manage because everybody was really sharp and wrote well. So that was great. So for some of you, the final project didn't quite come together the way you wanted to, or maybe you ran out of time, or it just didn't go exactly like you hoped. That it happens. It's life. It's a paper. Move on. And you can look at your work throughout the whole course, and all of you have done good work. And even every final paper articulated the gospel. That's great. You need that. All right. So this video is some personal encouragement and experience based on my journey through this course particular as a student. And I just want to share a reflection with you and give you an encouragement. So my life circumstances were different when I took this course. I was on campus in Kirkland. I was all of 19, 20 years old. You all are in different phases of life. And so some of what I have to say could have to do with the tumultuous nature of your 20s and early 30s, okay? But not all of it. I'm saying what I'm saying out of genuine concern for the gospel and for my friends who have no longer they no longer value, or at least maybe even believe, the gospel. I can tell you, I'm counting on, I might need 3 hands now to count the number of people I went to school with at Northwest, took theology with at Northwest, who would not consider themselves Christians anymore. Now, I'm not here to debate, whether they fell away or whether they were never Christians in the first place. There's a theological discussion about that, and you can argue the Bible back and forth, So, but I do wonder, did they ever really understand the gospel in the first place? Or did they just reject it? What happened? One of the top, and I mean elite students at Northwest, both from a leadership perspective and just a brain power and motivated, celebrated, a student of great influence. And I could actually say several, but one in particular is now in a cult. And it's like, a bad cult. Like, oh man, some of my best friends, I studied religion and philosophy and ministry and biblical studies at Northwest, and there are just several friends who just have dropped out. And every student at Northwest has to take this course. It's like, man, did we forget? Did we ever really have the gospel? And so I wanted to make sure that you all had a firm grasp of the gospel. It's almost like a service in hopes that we get so clear on it and we never let it go. It's like the gospel is so simple and profound that I guess that's not interesting enough for some people. They move on. Or maybe it's preached in a really stale way, and people are kind of looking for the upper level, the inside track. There is a way of thinking about the gospel and applying it to every layer of my problem, my issues, the world's problem, the world's issues. That's very interesting to see the redemptive story of Christ, all the way back to the David and Goliath story. To think about, how does the gospel come from this? I just do a quick one, David and Goliath, right? So many sermons, the bigger they are, the harder they fall. Be a champion like David, and the giants fall like nothing. It's like, is that it? Just be a champion? Like the kind of the championship Christianity, that view of Christianity is kind of very common in charismatic churches and Pentecostal churches. Like, be a champion, be a victory, and it sells a lot of books. It's like, is that what that's really about? Or did God send a champion to go out there and beat the giant for his people? Do you see the difference? let's all be David. Well, what happens when I can't be David? What happens if I'm shaking, my knees are shaking on the sidelines, and I'm afraid of the giant? God sends a champion out there, David, and Jesus is the son of David, the son of David. He fulfills the covenant to David. One from your family is going to sit on your throne. Jesus is the fulfillment of that covenant, like King of Kings, Lord of Lords of his people, So the gospel is plenty interesting enough to apply to my marriage, my relationship with my chillins. We call them chillins in my family. And like really the problem is not that I need new teaching other than the gospel. It's like I need to understand how the gospel applies to every area of my life. And salvation is, this will help too. Salvation is it's not a one-time transaction. It's an ongoing relationship. God is saving me layer by layer, problem by problem, to the uttermost. That's interesting, like, oh, the way I'm treating my money, the way I'm treating my spouse. Like, I don't know that there's, sometimes there's not a gospel response. It's like, I'm quite angry, or I'm quite legalistic or harsh. Like, where's the gospel there? It's like, where's the good news? Where's the grace? If my expectation of myself or others is be a champion, what's the problem? Why aren't you a champion? My expectation of other Christians or my church, be a champion. Then it's like, what? That's not going to be a gospel-centered situation. The good news is that God's the champion. He's the one who wins, and that he's changing me by the power of his Spirit because of the gospel. Part of the gospel is he gives us his Spirit to live a new life for his glory, with his power, his encouragement, his help, And so that's part of the gospel too. Now that can, that's enough, man. You preach a lifetime about the gospel, and good preachers have, Tim Keller, Martin Lloyd-Jones, Charles Spurgeon, So I just encourage you to hold the gospel. And one last little kind of like warning, the lure to go to a different teaching, in my understanding, in my experience, is like people who they want to get their problem solved. What's the problem? If you think the problem is the male patriarchy, let's say, you're going to go to a church that preaches against the male patriarchy. If you think the problem is people are out of touch with their bodies, that's the main problem. You're going to go to yoga church or something, right? If you think the problem is, Christians aren't walking in the fullness of the Spirit, you're going to go to a church that has the fullness of the Spirit. And it's like, now all those things are legitimate problems. Christians should walk in the fullness of the Spirit. They should be in tune with their bodies. And they shouldn't be patriarchal and nasty to each other, right? Those are all legitimate, but that's not the main problem. The main problem is human beings rebel against God. That's the main problem. Our heart is bent toward evil. That's the main problem. Then what's the main solution? Christ's death on the cross, his resurrection, so that we can have new life. You see that? And so if you go to a church that's always preaching, the solution to whatever they think the problem is, right? The problem is the church is not loving enough. The church is not tolerant. Then you're going to go to a tolerant church and watch, they'll scrap the gospel in favor of tolerance. So it's like, man, what's the main problem? What's the main solution? That's your gospel. And so just be careful if you're in a church and it's like, the death and resurrection and new life in Christ offered to us is this big, and they're preaching the problem, the patriarchy, the fullness, the whatever is this big, you're headed for trouble. And slavery is not far behind, because people kind of create new laws out of whatever they think the solution is, right? And then people get discouraged because they can't pass the muster of the new laws, and people get judgy, right? And they think that, oh, I'm keeping the new law, why aren't you? It's like, where's the gospel? Now we're back at law. Now we're back at slavery. And so watch out for that. And stay strong in the gospel. Christ died according to the scriptures. He was raised according to the scriptures. Glory, hallelujah. Let that penetrate every layer, every problem, every issue in my life and yours. All right, enough of the soapbox. Stay strong in the gospel. There you go. Good job in the course. It was a pleasure to work with you. Take care. Bye-bye.